Thank you for staying with us. We're going out of Nigeria now. Republican Donald Trump is the United States president-elect after he secured enough electoral vote to complete a stunning return to the White House after 4 years out of power. Mr. Trump's Democratic rival, Kamala Harris, has officially conceded, telling a crowd of supporters that she accepts the result and would ensure a peaceful transition of power. World leaders have offered Mr. Trump their congratulations, as the ex-president's team says it plans to announce personal choices in the coming days and weeks. Republicans have struck a triumphant note after winning control of the U.S. Senate, but control of the House of Representatives remains unclear. International affairs analyst Joshua Onyewere joins me for this conversation. It's good to have you join us.
Thank you for having me.
Right, this was an election that may have affected the American brand, a democratic brand that has been on for centuries, possibly the envy of the world, if not handled properly. But what was your reaction to the news that Donald Trump is on his way to the White House? Did this come as a nightmare for you or something you welcome?
Well, it depends on which school of thought you belong to. For some, this is a welcoming event, and for others, it isn't. Personally, I think it's a welcoming event. Americans voted, and Trump, like every election, is a reflection of the votes. At least we wouldn't say it's like a developing nation where the votes can be compromised. At least we are certain that the American election is free, fair, and transparent. So in this case, Trump is clearly a representation or reflection of the interest of American voters. So in essence, the best we can do is to celebrate with the Americans and, hope for the best outcome with regards to how Trump's new geopolitical landscape benefits every other person or every other nation across the world.
Right. So when you say it's a welcome development, are you talking in terms of the policies he has promised to put in place, Trump himself as a former sitting president, or because of the other candidate, the candidates representing the Democrats in that sense?
So when I say that, what I mean is Trump's America First agenda. So this is what his campaign represented, and this is what we would expect Trump to implement, even though we understand how democracies work, real democracies, how they function, where you have the presidency, but then you have institutions that are strong. These institutions can, from time to time go against the desires of the executive body, like, the presidency. So I would say it's a welcoming event with regards to now Trump putting America first. But for the whole world, it's a different expectation, contrary to that. So for Americans, it is a welcoming event because they voted him in, and now they would expect him to start implementing the promises he made, which is to bring back the industries back to America, which is to increase the tariff on China to 60%, and for the whole world from 20 to 40%, I think. And with regards to EU, with Trump, threatening to pull out from NATO. So we expect to see all of these things and how it's going to benefit, for instance, Russia and Ukraine war and Israel's Netanyahu's expansion in the Middle East. For Americans, this is what they want to see, and I believe the vote represented represents this interest.
And the Democrats will most likely disagree with you, talking about putting America first. You're saying the Democrats' ideology did not really put America first in terms of how liberal it was and other policies that Kamala put in place.
Well, unfortunately, there is something Trump does well as against the Democrats. What you see, or what we have seen, is the typical Democratic rhetoric, where when it comes to elections, and then you find, the discussions on policies and then of the GDPs, especially with the refugees and how much has to be spent on wars and all of those things. But Trump's special gift, which has been consistent, is I will fix it. I will fix it. He's not telling you about, the jargons of the political and economic dynamics, or indices and all of those graphs and all of that. He was simple about what he's saying, and this resonates with Americans. Americans were clear about what they want and what they wanted and what they expect to get from Trump, and Trump's speech resonates with them more. And clearly, this is what we saw in the election. Of course, the Democrats will not agree, but you can see the Republicans have gained the House, the upper house. So I think what has happened, in essence, reflects the interests of Americans. On the contrary, of course, we know all of the Project 2025, which isolates women's rights and all of that. But at the core of it, with the experiences of Americans on the street, with the trillions of dollars that is printed by the Fed, and the sponsorship of global wars, all of which do not serve the interest of the common American on the streets. Clearly, administered under Biden, I don't think any American in their reasonable mind would look at all of these factors that put Ukraine, Russia, China, and all of the things that are happening across the world, rather than Americans themselves. So this election reflects that core desires by Americans.
All right, so let's talk about the regional voting patterns. What was different for you this week? We know that states in close proximity with each other most times share similar voting patterns. Looking at some of the swing states and possibly some of the blue states in that sense, what was different this time in terms of voter enthusiasm and also a bit of demographic shift in that sense?
Well, for a start, the overwhelming votes by the Muslim community in America, voting overwhelmingly for Trump. That, for a starter, represents the protests they have against the Biden administration, which by extension Kamala Harris represents. Of course, we saw as well the large votes from women who voted for Kamala Harris. And this is expected. I mean, having seen the overturning of Roe v. Wade and the appointment of the Supreme Court judges and how they have, the legal decisions they have made recently that tend to isolate women across the United States. So these dynamics were clear. You could see where people were tilted to, but more importantly, it represents the discussions and the desires of Americans. But I want to focus more on the overwhelming votes by the Islamic community in America. They consistently, and not just the Muslim community, a lot of the younger generations of Americans do not want war, and they don't want to go to war in any country. And they have been campaigning, which Biden, ironically campaigned for, which he pulled out the American soldiers from Afghanistan in his first couple of months or weeks or months in office, but now plunging Americans into another war. Americans don't want war, and Trump represents these protectionist desires. Trump puts America first, unfortunately. Rhetorically, I cannot say, by mode of implementation, if he's going to be doing that in his next 4 years in office. So clearly, Americans are tired of war, and they don't want to be plunged into Ukrainian war with Russia. They want to focus on, what is currently happening. I mean, look at the American GDP and the American debt to GDP ratio. America is the largest indebted nation in the world right now, and you have risk of recession that is happening with the American Fed cutting interest rates by several basis points and struggling with the unemployment, the rising unemployment in the United States, with tech companies laying off employees. I mean, I think Americans were tired of hearing indices and they wanted change. And the vote reflects that. Is Trump the best candidate? Clearly not. But he appealed more to the Americans and they voted him in.
And whether he's the best candidate or not is now the president-elect of the United States. But a lot of reactions have, trailed Trump's promises while campaigning, from the economy to his stance on immigration, sex rights, and all that.
Yes.
How does the presidency, even one that has been there before, manage the monument from running the nation theoretically to actually running the country and putting some of these things in place?
You mean Biden?
No, I'm talking about Trump.
And you mean how he's going to implement this?
Right. What should be his major focus as soon as he gets into office, beyond some of the promises that were made at the campaign, especially he being a president that has been there before?
Like I initially mentioned, institutions will clearly kick in and start implementing policies that reflects the desires of the presidency. And the only concern here would be the Project 2025, which we all know seem to threaten, the democratic processes and kind of impose authoritarian leader on, the United States. But otherwise, we would expect the institutions to, as much as possible, to be, democratic in their dispensation. And, Trump will continue to be Trump. Like a friend of mine mentioned, erratic, unpredictable. This would be Trump. This would be Trump's presidency. He says one thing today and does another thing tomorrow. But, policies don't change that fact. It takes a lot of time to form policies and then start with the process of implementing policies. So even if Trump is who he is, we would expect the American institution, the American democratic institution, to be, be what they are known for, implementing policies and all of that, and checkmating each other and being as much as possible transparent in their dispensation. For me, I think what we expect to see is for Americans a lot of I wouldn't say the best experience, because, think about it, 60% of tariff. This means Americans will pay for it, this means the cost of goods is going to skyrocket. And 20% of tariff on products imported into America, this is going to throw the world into a global financial, meltdown. We can already see countries already going back to the drawing board and analyzing what Trump's presidency would mean for them, not just the United States. So it's going to be difficult. And you can't just create industries in 1 month or 1 year. It takes years to create industries. So if you want to be self-reliant and run a protectionist policy, you need to have those things in place like China and Russia does. So you just cannot create industries overnight. So we would hope that the 60% tariff on China, because most of the products in America are imported from China, we would hope that he wouldn't move forward from this. But Trump being Trump, you never really know. So we would expect that these institutions will kick in and say, no, we can't do this for now. Let's put all of this in place. And yes, you would, get some loggerheads between the American leaders and hopefully, come to a middle ground where it benefits Trump's image and the American desires.
And I agree with you. Trump being Trump, you may never know his next line of action. But in his major, step in decision, he has named his campaign manager, Susie Wiles, as a chief of staff. That's the first person in his cabinet. Well, when you put that side by side with Kamala also promising to work with this administration, is she going to be a likely figure from what you see?
Unless the institutions engage her, I don't see Trump doing that. I honestly don't see Trump aligning with Kamala Harris on any platform. He's made that clear. With all the name callings from J.D. Vance, Trump's vice president, I don't see that I don't see that happening. And clearly, if Americans didn't vote her in, it would be hard to engage. I would expect Kamala to be on the sidelines and being critical of policies. That's expected of what's your rivalries. But being involved, I honestly don't see that happening.
Well, let's talk about what this means for the Democrats. The presidential election loss, as well as losing control of the Senate and possibly the House to the GOP, has left some of them angry and questioning the future of the party, as some have questioned the choice of Tim Walz as even running mate, and possibly Kamala not being able to distance herself from how Biden has performed. Some persons have said that this loss may have set the Democrat back for at least a decade. What are the hopes for Democrats, and what should they be looking into now as Trump begins working on his cabinet?
Well, one place to start is putting Americans first. Anything else clearly wouldn't work. It's easy to look at Trump's presidency in the past 4 years and make a decision to vote him out like Americans did. And that's exactly what happened with the Biden's administration. The past 4 years, Americans looking at that and making a decision to vote him out. This Trump's presidency offers Democrats an opportunity to go back and reflect. What do Americans really want? Do they want more wars, funding, look at the American GDP. It's, exploded. Americans' debt exploded in the past two years in trillions, and having about 20% of, I think 20 to 30% of America's GDP going to pay debt. Nobody wants this. Nobody wants this. So this is and this clearly was created by the Biden administration. So I believe the Democrats should, or I would expect that the Democrats would go back to the drawing board and start to think about what do Americans want. It's not about the refugees, the migrants, the Ukraine war, but Americans. Until they get that done, they are not going anywhere. Trump will be replaced by another person who understands these dynamics, who puts Americans' interests first, even if he's not going to implement that, but rhetorically knows that this is what the people want. What interest does a war in Ukraine serve Americans? What interest? Meanwhile, billions and trillions are minted by the Fed to go fund wars in Ukraine. And Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is engaged in a war because he knows that he's getting funding from the United States. On what interest? And this is why Trump has said several times he's pulling the U.S. out of NATO until the EU member states are responsible for themselves. If Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, said the same thing. He said, America should put their interests first. They are putting their interests first. And that's the best thing to do, just as they, France, should, or EU member states, should put their interests first. So I think this is the time where economies across the world are struggling, including Nigeria. Debt to GDP ratios are exploding, excluding Germany. But this is the time where nations should go back to the drawing board and ask themselves the question, what does this benefit our people? Like the previous guest mentioned about the, the green energy implementation in Nigeria when we do not have electricity. Wouldn't it be better to put the electricity, to fix the electricity in Nigeria first that benefits the people before talking about green energy? So, yes.
And that's a critical point you mentioned there. For countries to go back to the drawing board and decide how this new administration will benefit, them as a country. Thank you very much for joining us on Standpoint, International Affairs Analyst Joshua Onyewere. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And at Standpoint this week, remember you can watch the repeat broadcast at 11 p.m. tonight and 5 a.m. on Sunday. Thank you for watching. I am Olamide Adeyemi. Bye for now.